Hi guys, I'm so glad you decided to join me again. I thought we would stray from my typical art history lesson that I do beforehand and instead just focus on the theme of hope today. So rainbows are a really good universal sign for better days ahead. And I've noticed that some people have been posting on social media where they have made some rainbows and hung them in the windows of their home to remind others that we're all united in this together and that we'll get over it, we'll get through it. So I thought that we would show you some different examples in different kinds of media because I know that you're limited on what you have at home. So my kids thought it would be fun to use some of the leftover mosaic squares that we had from our Paul Klee mosaic lesson. So they made some starting with squares. I went ahead and made some with paint, and then we embellished with crayons, markers, oil pastels, and I'm also going to make an example here in a few minutes using watercolor, so I'll show you how to do that. I wanted to stress to you that the rainbow that you make does not have to be a classic rainbow with the Roy G. Biv 7 stripes of color in order. You could absolutely do a rainbow with just 2 or 3 colors. You could make it with 12 or 14 colors. You can put the colors in any order that you want. I've made some thick stripes next to thin stripes. I've done lots of different kinds of dotted lines. I even included some hearts over here in this one and the word love on some of these. There's a little strip using the word love on this one in green. So really you are open to do this however you want. Just because a typical rainbow has 7 Roy G. Biv colors in them does not mean that that's what you have to do today. So if you'll stick with me here, I will do a little tutorial on how to make one out of oil pastels and watercolors to create a resist. Okay, let's get started. I'm set up here to show you how to make a rainbow using an oil pastel or wax crayon resist. It's called a resist because the oil in your crayons or your oil pastels will naturally push away or resist any sort of watered down or watercolor paint that you apply around or on top of it. So that's why it's called a resist. So that's a fun little process to try, I think, for this watercolor project. So I'm gonna start by creating maybe a dotted line here, my first upside down U shape for the rainbow that I want to make. And remember, you can make your rainbow really wide or you can make your rainbow really tall and narrow. I'm a little bit in between here. When I'm applying these colors, I'm pressing a little bit firm. I want to make sure I get a nice bright mark that's nice and strong so that it will show through when I add watercolor. So really, I'm just thinking in dotted lines right now. So now I'm gonna do another row where the lines are maybe facing another way. You could be writing a word right now in this kind of upside down U rainbow shape. You could be repeating the same letter over and over, maybe the letter of your first name. You could be making hearts or circles. You could be making zigzag lines. The possibilities really are endless. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my brush nice and wet, and I tend to kind of pet my watercolor a lot to get it to start to soften so I can get a really bright color. And the key to watercolors is lots of water and lots of paint. I think I'm gonna go over this pink one here. And I can go right over it and the pink will show through. But I'm gonna give it a little bit of help by not directly painting right on top of it, instead kind of right around it. It helps it a little bit, I think. Clean out my brush a little bit. I think next, I'll add a little bit of yellow here. Now yellow and orange are next to each other on the color wheel. So I know that while my orange stripe is still wet, if I add a yellow stripe next to it and the colors bleed into one another, I'm gonna get a nice in-between color. Isn't that pretty? It's kind of sunsetty. But when I started with orange, let's say I had decided to do blue here. Blue and orange are not next to each other on the color wheel. They're far away from each other. So where the two colors would touch and bleed together would make kind of an icky in-between color. So if I wanted the stripe here to be blue, I would have two options. The first would be to try and leave a tiny little space between my orange and blue so they don't touch each other. The second option might be to let the orange stripe dry before I go back in with blue so that they cannot bleed into one another. So I'm going to consider that when I do this outside stripe. Let's see, I could do blue as an example since I discussed that. So my two options would be to let this orange stripe dry or to try and create just a little tiny white space or in between area there where they don't touch each other. So I don't have to worry about them bleeding into each other and making a yucky in between color. Rainbows are known for being bright and beautiful, not for having grays and browns on them. So I want to try to avoid that if I can. And again, oh, see how these two colors are touching each other? It's actually working out just fine. And notice I haven't done classic rainbow colors at all. I haven't done them in order or anything. And that turned out just fine. So I might want to let it dry a little bit and then flatten it under a book so that I can get rid of those wrinkles. And then I could go ahead and cut it out. I could also add embellishments once it's dry with crayons or even markers or colored pencils or oil pastels. I might even, if like my kids and I had these leftover mosaic papers, I could absolutely use those to incorporate in my rainbow as well. If you wanted to, you could include like maybe a little bit of poetry or like a little message of love or care somewhere in your rainbow if you wanted to embellish it even more. So I hope that some of you create these and hang them in your windows or include them in cards to loved ones. And I hope you're all staying happy and healthy. I hope you all know I miss you so much and I appreciate you tuning in with me. See you soon.